Inflation in March 2026 jumped to 3.3%. That is the highest annual inflation rate since May 2024. And if you're on Social Security, a pension, or any kind of fixed income, this number directly affects how much money you will have in your pocket for the rest of 2026 and into 2027. But here's what nobody is telling you. Buried inside this report is a signal about your 2027 Social Security COLA that just changed dramatically in just the last few hours. One expert went from predicting a 1.7% raise next year to now projecting 3.2%. And it happened because of this one report. This morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released the Consumer Price Index report for March 2026. This is the first CPI report since the US-Iran war began on February 28th, and it is a big one. Here are the raw numbers. The Consumer Price Index increased 0.9% on a seasonally adjusted basis in March, after rising just 0.3% in February. Over the last 12 months, the All Items Index increased 3.3%. The annual rate is the highest since April 2024, and it jumped sharply from 2.4% in February. To put that in plain English, prices in America rose nearly 1% in just 1 month. That's massive. March's 0.9% monthly jump is the biggest single-month increase since June 2022, right in the middle of the post-pandemic inflation crisis. Now, what drove it? One thing above everything else: gasoline. The index for energy rose 10.9% in March, led by a 21.2% increase in the index for gasoline, which accounted for nearly 3/4 of the monthly all items increase. Gasoline prices posted their largest single-month increase on record during March. Think about that. The largest gasoline price spike ever recorded in the Consumer Price Index. That's what this report is showing. But here's the good news buried in the data. Excluding food and energy, core prices rose just 0.2% for the month and 2.6% from a year ago, both 0.1 percentage point below what economists had forecast. There were even pockets of outright price declines. Medical care, personal care, and used cars and trucks all fell during the month. Overall, grocery prices fell 0.2%. Eggs fell another 3.4% and have tumbled 44.7% over the past year. So if you've noticed eggs getting cheaper, that's real, and the data confirms it. The bottom line from this morning's report: inflation is hot, but it's almost entirely because of the Iran war driving up gas prices. The underlying economy's inflation is actually pretty contained at 2.6%. The question is, what happens next? And that's where it gets complicated. Before we get to Social Security and what the Fed is going to do, let me talk about what this means for your actual daily life right now. Gas prices. Brent crude oil spiked to $118 per barrel by the end of March from roughly $70 before the Iran conflict began. Prices have since declined, but remain elevated at around $96 as of today. That means gas prices at your local station are still well above where they were at the start of the year. And experts say the pain isn't over. Economists say that even if more oil tankers start flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, it may take a while for things to normalize. Damage from strikes on energy infrastructure in the Middle East will take time to fix. One JP Morgan economist described the likely price dynamics as up like a rocket and down like a feather, meaning gas prices spike fast, but come down painfully slowly. Groceries. Right now, grocery prices overall actually fell slightly in March. But don't get too comfortable. Economists warn this is only the beginning for food. Food prices, travel, and shipping costs are all going up in April and will exacerbate the pain. Higher diesel prices are raising transportation costs, and that eventually gets passed on through every product on every shelf in every store in America. Amazon is already responding to this. The company will start levying a 3.5% fuel and logistics surcharge for third-party sellers in the US and Canada starting April 17th. UPS and FedEx have also imposed higher fuel surcharges since the start of the Iran war. Everything you order online is about to cost more. Food prices overall increased 2.7% over the last year. Some categories like beef and coffee have seen prices surge even more due to supply issues. For seniors and retirees, this is real pain. You are already receiving a 2.8% COLA for 2026, But now, inflation is at 3.3% annually and climbing. That means your benefits are already losing purchasing power relative to what things actually cost. This is the section I want you to pay the most attention to, because this morning's CPI report just dramatically changed the outlook for your 2027 Social Security raise. Let me first explain how COLA works for those who are new here. The Social Security COLA is based on the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, called the CPIW, from the third quarter of one year to the third quarter of the next. That means the July, August, and September inflation reports this year will determine your 2027 raise, which gets announced in October and kicks in with your January 2027 check. Now here's where this morning's data gets really interesting. Before today, there were two main forecasters tracking 2027 COLA projections. The Senior Citizens League had been projecting 2.8% for 2027, the same as this year, and they are holding steady at that number after today's report. But independent analyst Mary Johnson dramatically revised her estimate upward to 3.2%, up from just 1.7% last month. 2 months ago, her estimate was only 1.2%. Johnson said, "This represents the biggest single-month jump we've seen in inflation since 2022." And she described this as just the tip of the inflation iceberg, saying there will likely be continued upward price increases for groceries and shelter as rising gasoline prices and supply chain disruptions get passed through to consumers. She is closely watching oil prices, as the CPIW used to calculate COLA is weighted more heavily for gasoline. So in just 2 months, Mary Johnson's COLA estimate went from 1.2% to 1.7% to now 3.2%. That's a massive shift driven entirely by the Iran war and its energy price impact. A forecast for a higher COLA is not necessarily good news for retirees, who have to absorb the shock of higher prices. A bigger COLA only comes when prices are rising fast, and those rising prices hit your wallet before the COLA adjustment does. For 2026, monthly Medicare Part B premiums went up 9.7% at a time when the COLA only increased Social Security benefits by 2.8%. Whatever the Social Security COLA in 2027 ends up being, seniors should be prepared for a large portion of it to be absorbed by rising healthcare costs. Here's the realistic scenario for you going forward. If the ceasefire between the US and Iran holds, and oil prices fall back to $70 to $80 by summer, inflation will cool, and your 2027 COLA will likely come in around 2.5 to 3%. If the ceasefire breaks down and oil stays above $90 to $100 through Q3, your COLA could hit 3.5% or higher, but your gas, groceries, and medical bills will all be more expensive too. Either way, watch this channel every time a CPI report drops. We cover every single one because your COLA and your financial security depends on it. The other big question this morning's CPI report answers, or at least gives us clues about, is what the Federal Reserve is going to do with interest rates. And this matters for your savings, your CDs, your mortgage, and your overall financial security. The Fed has held the federal funds rate steady at 3.5% to 3.75% for 2 consecutive meetings in 2026. The Fed still projects 1 rate cut this year, but the timing remains unclear. After this morning's hot CPI number, here's what the experts are saying. Goldman Sachs Asset Management said, "We believe the Fed will look through the energy-driven noise so long as these factors hold." Because core inflation, excluding food and energy, only rose 0.2%. The Fed is likely to treat the March spike as a temporary, war-driven event rather than a sign of deeper inflation problems. Raymond James chief economist Eugenio Aleman said, "As long as the increase in gasoline prices is not translating into an increase in the core measures of inflation, then the Fed is probably not going to react to the noise in the headline measures of inflation." However, Fed minutes from the March meeting showed that some officials cited a strong case for describing future rate decisions as two-sided, acknowledging the possibility of both rate cuts and rate hikes. The vast majority of officials noted that higher oil prices would increase inflation in the near term and delay the anticipated decline toward the Fed's 2% target. With the next FOMC meeting on April 28th and 29th, officials are expected to keep rates unchanged. Prevailing forecasts point to only 1 cut in 2026, and that's contingent on further progress in taming inflation and signs of a softer labor market. What does this mean for you? If you have money in a high-yield savings account or a CD, good news. Rates are staying elevated. A 4 to 5% APY is still very achievable right now. Lock in a 12-month CD now before any potential rate cut later in the year reduces those yields. If you're carrying variable rate debt like a credit card, bad news. Rates are not coming down anytime soon. Pay that down aggressively. If you have a variable rate mortgage, same warning. Don't count on relief. Let me give you 5 concrete actions to take based on today's inflation report. 1. Review your monthly budget this weekend. With inflation at 3.3% and your COLA at 2.8%, you are losing ground. Find one expense to cut so you stay ahead of inflation eating your purchasing power. 2. If you haven't locked in a high-yield CD yet, do it this week. With the Fed likely on hold through most of 2026, today's 4 to 5% CD rates are some of the best you'll see for a while. Online banks like Marcus by Goldman Sachs, Ally, and Discover are all offering competitive rates right now. 3. Watch your grocery and energy spending carefully this month. April is where economists say the real food price increases start showing up. Track your spending closely and adjust your grocery strategy accordingly. 4. Pay attention to the April CPI report dropping May 12th. That will be the critical follow-up. If gasoline prices partially reverse in April, the headline rate could fall significantly. If they remain elevated, the inflation story changes materially. Voice for Liberty. We will be here covering it live. 5. Do not panic and make dramatic financial moves based on one report. The underlying inflation, core CPI, is still relatively contained at 2.6%. This is a war-driven energy shock, not the broad-based inflation crisis of 2021-2022. Stay calm, stay informed, stay protected. Here's your takeaway from today. Inflation hit 3.3% in March, the hottest in nearly 2 years. Gas prices drove almost all of it. Core inflation is actually well behaved. The 2027 Social Security COLA estimate just jumped to 3.2% from one expert. But a bigger COLA means you're living through higher inflation. The Fed is staying put on rates through April 28th at minimum. This is exactly why I started this channel. Nobody's connecting these dots for everyday Americans. Hit like and subscribe so you never miss a daily update. Drop a comment below. How has inflation hit your budget this month? I read every single one. I'll see you tomorrow.